welcome everyone. We're glad that you've joined us today to hear about some strategies for leveraging CIID resources for EDPass success from our CIID technical assistance experts. We hope that you've had a great file submission season, and we're glad that you've made time to join us today. My name is Dan Mello. I'm the CIID Targeted and Universal Technical Assistance Lead, and my first job today is to cover some logistics as part of our introduction. I want to let you know that there'll be an opportunity for you to participate. We invite you to participate using the chat box to the lower right side of your screen. And just to test that out for today, I thought I would ask you just an easy icebreaker question. The weather is certainly starting to turn here in the Northeast. I'm looking forward to spring. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love it if you share with your colleagues across the country, what's your favorite part about spring? What's your favorite thing about spring? If you don't like spring at all, I would also be interested to know. It certainly is, an exciting time of the year. I was excited the other day. My son, he wakes up at 5 a.m., but he called me to the front door as soon as he woke up. He opened the door. He said, Dad, come here. And I was so proud. He wanted me to hear all the new birds that he could hear in the yard, and he wanted to share that with me. And we started looking around and naming them. And it's just a very exciting time of the year. So just flipping through our chat, outdoor dining on the patio. I love it. Spring wildflowers, flowering trees, longer days. I think we need some of the more hours of daylight. I think we're all welcoming that. Thumbs up from everyone. New growth. This is all wonderful. I'm even more excited than when I woke up this morning. So thank you for sharing, folks. Keep them coming as I introduce our agenda. As I said, I'm going to provide our introduction, which includes our learning objectives, introduce you to our presenters today, and also our agenda. So we're going to start with our introduction. I'm going to be providing just a very high-level general context setting so that all audience participants kind of understand the context for some of our content today. So this is a level setting exercise. We're not diving too deeply into the content for the generate cycle. Items 3 through 6 here, I want to provide you the format. We've asked our experts to identify common challenges that SEAs face in the field when implementing Generate. These are things that happen, they just come up over the course of time. And we want to be able to explain which Generate or CIID resources might be the most useful, how to leverage them, and the results of utilizing these tools to resolve some of these issues to sustain your implementation. After that, we'll open up for some discussion, little state sharing. And then, of course, we always welcome your feedback to improve our service in the webinar format with our evaluation. So I'm just going to briefly introduce, and our CTA experts are going to tell you just a little bit more about themselves when they hop on camera. But today we're featuring Charlie Silva, who is a CTA advisor and former state special education director from Idaho. Christina McDonald, who is the NESIS coordinator from New Hampshire, their student information system, and now expert CIID TA provider, and our own Jeff Wheaton, who is a CIID ETL developer with lots of expertise to share. So they're going to be presenting these scenarios, and they're going to be available to chat via the text and also answer your questions as needed. Your learning outcomes for today's webinar are up on the screen, and they are, as I said. So I'm going to be communicating about an overview of the Generate process, and we want to be sure to communicate and that you know how to locate CIID's Generate data integration and reporting tools and resources, and understand those strategies and resources to troubleshoot those most common programmatic and technical challenges that arise in the course of the work. Back to our level setting, and for context, I just want to start with what I hope you recognize as our new Generate release calendar, because it really drives a lot of our work. We are responsive to the file EDFacts due dates and the release of EDFacts file specifications. So we are ensuring that Generate is up to date to meet the high quality data standards required for EDFacts reporting. And for each of these due dates, we go through a cycle that looks a little bit like this. Again, high level overview of a review of source data, checking in to update your or verify your ETL, migration of data, checking data, production of files, and review of files. So this happens several times per year. And on a more macro scale, this is overseen by a yearly cycle with check-ins along the way of technical oversight and administration that involves planning, allocation, fiscal monitoring, ensuring security and compliance measures, maintaining infrastructure, coordinating initiative management, and collaboration and communication. And lastly, the nitty-gritty of the technical development. Wrong arrow key there. I also wanted to just feature in this context setting, level setting, the Generate technical cycle. So when these new versions come out, just creating awareness about what's different, what's coming out in the new version compared to the last. Generally, the code base update is the responsibility of the CIID developers, but there may be back-end things that you do within your SCA. Technical testing and quality assurance, which we should be sort of a minimal process because of the way that Generate has been tested and deployed, and then in-state deployment and monitoring. So your technical teams ensuring that Generate is operating within your environment. I believe now we get to feature our first speaker. I'm going to turn it over to Christina, with a scenario that I think we're all pretty familiar with. Christina, would you mind taking it away?
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you, and welcome everyone. As Dan mentioned, my name is Christina McDonald, and I am one of the TA providers here at CIID. And I get the fortune of introducing you to our first scenario, which is not going to be all that unfamiliar. We're going to be talking about staff turnover and some of the resources that you have available or that you have developed through the Generate process that can guide and support you in addressing this particular challenge as it arises. So next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So in order to really talk through this, we made a few assumptions. So in this particular example, we're going to talk about bringing on board a new Part B data manager. And we're fortunate in that we were able to hire an experienced data manager who is familiar with the 618 and 616 submissions under IDEA. This person knows and understands the expectations of both EDFacts as well as the annual performance report requirements. But in their previous state, they had only a single special education information data system from which they created the data files for EDFacts. So the concept of using multiple data systems is new for them. This new staff member has been on board for a few weeks now, so they've been introduced to Generate at the high level, but now it's time to peel back the curtain and look at how the data comes together from those multiple systems to create the EDFacts files. So we're going to begin looking at where the data is being collected and housed at the state level and the process by which it comes together. And in my experience, whenever we're talking about this, it's better to start the conversation with a picture. Because even when you're working with experienced data team members, when you start talking about multiple pieces coming from multiple places, it helps to draw it out. Now, fortunately, you've already done that. You created an architecture document early in your Generate process. And while the document itself will be housed in your own files, you can find out more information about it on the CIID website using the link on the screen. Simply navigate to the site and click on Toolkit, find Step 1, and expand Task 1.2 entitled Assess System Architecture. So as I mentioned, as part of the planning and maintaining of Generate, your team put together a document depicting the system architecture. This is typically a graphical representation of all the systems that are feeding data into Generate and the flow of how that data gets in there. Depending upon the complexity of your architecture and the steps that are involved, there may be some elements on this diagram that a data manager does not need to know. However, it can be a great anchor for talking about the different data systems that are involved and which data is collected and housed in each system. So don't be afraid to print out a copy, always a copy, and dig out your highlighters to leverage the power of color coding. Also, once your data manager has a sense of various systems that are involved and what data is collected in each, you can start talking about which systems are the authoritative sources for the data. So when talking to someone new, it's important not to skip why that is considered an authoritative data source. We all know, having worked with our systems directly, that we're familiar with the data pitfalls of each of those systems, but a new person might not understand why the race data in the special education data system may not be as reliable or even match the information that's coming from the student information system. Once the new staff know where the data is coming from, Dan, can you go back one slide? Thank you. We can start shifting the conversation to how it gets there. And here again, you've already created a document for this. It's called the ETL, or the Extract, Transform, and Load documentation. And it depicts how the information is brought out of the source databases, reformatted as needed, and loaded into Generate. And again, the CIID website here is a great resource for locating these tools. While you'll need to find the completed tools in your own files, you may find it easier to walk through a new data manager with a blank copy just to get a sense of the structure of the document. These ETL documents are also there if you're considering using Generate to do a new file upload. Just navigate to the CIID website again, but click on Publications in the menu bar, and then you can either select or scroll down to where it says Data Integration and select the ETL checklist. And this will bring up a list of all the ETL checklists that are available to you, and you can select the one that you need. So as with the system architecture, you have these documents, so there's no need to recreate the wheel. I'll add a caveat, though, in that you need to take into consideration the roles and responsibilities of the different individuals in your state. So what is the data manager responsible for? What expertise and knowledge do they bring to the table? Also, as you introduce the ETL and other aspects of this process, language is going to be very important. As with any new role or system, there's an entire vocabulary that comes with it. And even if they have extensive data and database experience, some of the terms will be unfamiliar to them. For example, most data managers probably won't know the term option set. However, if you start talking about potential values or even field values, they may understand what you're talking about. Case in point, I have extensive experience with both databases and database design. I've worked with developers, software engineers, and project staff to create these systems. However, in preparing for this presentation, I was asked to explain how unit aggregation to a data manager, and I looked at them. In more than 20 years of working in this field, I have never come across that term. It just wasn't the language that we use to describe the process. So be mindful that the language you use every day with Generate might be basic and familiar to you, but it'll be completely foreign for a new staff member. Another thing to consider is that the ETL is an incredibly rich and detailed document. It is valuable for understanding what is going on under the hood with Generate. However, there's a lot of information in that ETL that a data manager probably doesn't need to know. Identify in advance what are those parts of the ETL that are relevant for them and where their insight can be helpful to support the process. Make sure you're upfront with them about the sections that they can just overlook. For example, chances are your data manager does not need to know the tables that the data is coming from, but the source element name will be important to them, as will the possible values or option sets for those fields, because they'll be able to understand and provide insight into the data that's being collected and what each of those values means, as well as where the potential errors can arise within and between the fields. Where the ETL can be very overwhelming, it's also important to identify strategies and parameters or boundaries to manage the information that's coming at that new staff. You may want to consider beginning with a blank ETL document to limit the amount of information overload, or possibly introduce them to some of the more salient elements first, and then let them know that you'll circle back to the other sections later. You can also color code a copy of the ETL and gray out what's not relevant to them to help limit the noise. The other thing to consider is that the ETLs are related to each data set for each file submission that you do. So take some time to explain not only the ETL, but build their understanding for how to read an ETL so that they'll be able to interpret and read the other ETLs that they're going to be working with. And as you do this, think about having that architecture diagram in front of you as a reference, because it'll give a visual to help them connect the dots between how the elements that are being identified in the ETL are moving from the source data systems, being transformed, and then imported into Generate. One other piece is the transformation process described in the ETL may also be new for some staff, especially if they're new. Or it may be something that they know under another term, such as translation or crosswalk. Most likely, however, if they have any experience with EDFacts files or the resulting data in the EPR, even if they've been working at the local level, they will have some frame of reference for this process. For example, I do not know of any state that does not have to do some form of transformation between their state's race categories and the EDFacts permitted values. Anyone who's working with the data knows that what is entered at the local level is not necessarily what is being rendered on the EDFacts reports. Somewhere along the line, it's being translated to fit those EDFacts categories. Beyond the EDFacts categories, the ETL includes transformation information as it relates to the Common Education Data Standards, or CIIDs. It's important to understand how the CIIDs underlies Generates and how Generate uses it to identify the data needed for EDFacts reports. After all, the way that Generate eases the burden on states when EDFacts reporting or source systems adjust or change slightly from year to year is probably why your state started using the system in the first place. I hope this helped you to be able to see how the architecture and the ETL documentation can be great tools to help you orient your new staff, whether they're in data manager or in different roles. Documentation can be incredibly frustrating and time consuming, especially when there are so many other priorities on your plate. However, the documents that you create as these ones and your use case, your project planner, they serve as a form of institutional memory. And the more complete and more up to date they are, the easier it is to sustain your system and to minimize disruption through the inevitable staff changes and even leadership changes. So that is it for me. I'd like to hand you over to my colleague, Jeff, who will guide you through our next scenario.
Hey, thanks, Christina. Hi, everybody. This is Jeff Wheaton. I'm located in the Midwest, and as we were talking about the weather earlier, Midwest is known for its crazy weather. Yesterday, it was almost 80 degrees, and today it's 19 degrees, I think. So had this webinar been yesterday, you might have caught me with a T-shirt and a ball cap on. I've been a CIID ETL developer now for the last couple of years, and prior to that, I was at Illinois State Board of Education for, 5, 6 years. So I've been in education data for some time, and I've been a data geek my whole career. So I'm working today to give you a couple of scenarios related to using Generate to prepare EDFacts files. So the first scenario I'm going to present is you already have Generate. You used it last year to create an EDFacts file, and a year has passed, and now you're going to use Generate again this year to produce that same EDFacts file. So what can you do to make sure that that's a smooth transition? This is just a high-level diagram of Generate process, and I'll just break it down real quickly for you. Over on the left, you've got existing state systems. That's the source data that's being pulled into Generate to be used to ultimately create an EDFacts report. And then the green circle there that says B in it, that's where we're extracting the data, we're transforming it, we're loading it into Generate. That's the magic ETL. That goes into the Generate staging area. Generate does its magic with that, and then poof, out pops an EDFacts file. So in a perfect world, you say, you know what, we used this last year to produce whatever the EDFacts file was. We should be able to just run that exact same process this year, and it should be perfect. But as we know, things change from year to year. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next couple of slides. So let me give you a couple of examples of what could change and what you might want to watch out for. Christina talked about agency personnel, staff turnover. So are they familiar with the EDFacts process? Have they been trained on Generate? Do they even have access to Generate in order to run these processes? So that's something to consider. What else may have changed? Well, the agency infrastructure. And I know a lot of us, that's a gray area. We don't even care about it. It happens outside of our field of expertise. But new servers, new databases, states are always updating their technology over time. So things can happen upstream from Generate that can cause issues when we're trying to run the exact same thing from last year. The source data systems may have changed. Did you implement a new student information system last year or a new special education system? Are there new tables now that the data is coming from? Some states will, rather than letting Generate reach right into the source system and grab the data directly out of it, they will instead make a snapshot or a copy of that data and put it somewhere safe and then allow Generate to pull from there. Well, if that's your process, then you have to make sure that that data has been snapshotted and placed somewhere where Generate can access it for this year. And I just want to make a note here that those are the types of changes that may require changes to your ETL, the programming language that looks for that data and pulls it into Generate. And then source data itself could also change. Christina mentioned this about the race codes earlier, but same thing with anything, like maybe your original system, your source system used to have yes and no as values. Now it has ones and zeros. If those changes were made upstream to Generate, then the ETL would need to be changed in order to accept those new code values. Also, sometimes there may be calculations that you're doing, some function in your system that's producing a data value that's ultimately being used for EDFacts. Well, has that calculation changed? Did your agency or your business unit change its business rules for how to perform that calculation? And that could result in some differences this year that we would want to be aware of. And again, these could require changes to the ETL in Generate. What else could have changed since last year? Well, Generate version updates. Dan earlier showed the release schedule for Generate. And I think our goal is to have a new version of Generate multiple times a year, usually about 8 to 10 weeks in advance of the next round of file specification due dates for EDFacts. And so that gives the states plenty of time to review what's changed in not only the EDFacts file specifications, but what Generate may have added new features or functionality and where there may be a need to make modifications to the ETL. All of that would be documented in the release notes that get published prior to Generate being released. And also, so you want to make sure that you have the latest version of Generate installed prior to working on the next round of EDFacts files. And you can find the latest version of Generate. It's in the resources and about menu option on the Generate application, and it'll pop up on the screen and tell you what version you currently have. And as we know, EDFacts will change their file specifications from time to time. I think last year there was a big change to assessments. And so the good news is that Generate and the CIID team, we take care of all of those changes within Generate. So any EDFacts file specifications, we take care of those within the Generate logic. However, some of those file specification changes may require new data elements to be collected or new code values to be added to the collections. So those may require changes to the ETL. And in some instances, who knows, it may require changes to your source systems to aggregate data or do something in order to provide that value, that data to Generate. As I mentioned before, the version updates, we usually roll those out a couple months in advance, so you have plenty of time to address any of those changes. And again, that information's published in our release notes that comes with each release. All right, so that scenario that I just reviewed was you're just redoing a submission file that you did last year from Generate. Well, now I want to talk about a different scenario, and this is you're feeling really good about things, and now you want to create a new EDFacts report from Generate for the first time. So we'll kind of talk about what that process looks like. Now, again, this scenario also assumes that you already have Generate installed, it's operational and so forth. But if it's not, we have a ton of documentation at this link that shows here of how to install, configure, and make Generate ready for use. So producing a new EDFacts report from Generate, it's a pretty basic process. It follows a typical, I'll say, a product development life cycle where we go through a discovery phase, a development phase, a testing phase, and an implementation phase. And I'll talk about each of those in the subsequent slides. So what happens during discovery? A lot of the things that Christina referenced earlier with regard to knowledge and things like that, it's all happening here, identifying what data elements are needed for this particular EDFacts report, what's required for it, and then where can we find those data elements in our own system. Are they located on this server, in this database, or this system over here? How current is that information? What are the concerns we have about the quality of that information? And then you say, okay, now we've identified where that's coming from. Where do we put it in Generate? How do we get it into Generate so Generate can do what it needs to do to process that information? What columns and tables? And then also, do we need to do any transformations to that data? Do we need to change some of the code values around whatever that looks like? So this is where the ETL checklist comes in really handy. Normally, again, you would have the ETL checklist from last year's report that you had already produced out of Generate, but now you're creating a new report this year. So you need to fill out this ETL checklist, starting with a blank one and going through this discovery phase. Now, how long this takes, it all depends on how much knowledge and documentation you already have about your source data elements. Theoretically, you probably already know where these data elements are sourced because you've been producing them, using them for EDFacts for these same reports. Now you're just taking those and pushing them into a different way of processing that to create the EDFacts. Once you've got the ETL checklist all populated and everybody knows where the data is coming from, then you can start the process of development, which is really writing the ETL. It's writing the programming language that says, go grab it from here, from the source data, transform it as needed, and push it into the appropriate Generate database tables so that Generate can do what it needs to do. And just a point of reference here, of course, this is new development. It should be done in a development environment just so you don't risk, breaking anything in production. And then we get to the testing. Now, testing is really the meat of this whole process right here, because you want to make sure that what Generate's going to produce not only matches what you would have normally produced, but that it does it efficiently, effectively, and so forth. And it's a process that you can just put into production and kind of run it year to year. So first thing we would do is load the data into Generate. That uses the ETL. Then we have some tools in Generate that really facilitate this testing process. One is staging validation utility. And really what that is Generate includes a library of business rules that it will scan all of the data that you've loaded into it and look for anomalies or data concerns. And then it'll notify you to say, oh, you're missing a required field. Your ETL forgot to add this field into it. Or you've got some data that looks a little bit odd, like this child is marked as IDEA, but they don't have an IDEA start date or a disability type. And then you can decide how to handle those and make the corrections however need be, whether in the source data or in the ETL. Reload that data, rerun the staging validation utility if you'd like, and then you can move on to moving the data through Generate. Now, once Generate has processed all of that data, we have another utility called a submission file comparison. And what this does is it lets you take your submission file that you would have normally produced for EDFacts and compare it to what Generate produces. And it'll do a side-by-side automated comparison, row by row, column by column, and tell you wherever there are differences. Of course, most of the EDFacts files are, let's say, student count related, so you'll have accounts of students or disciplines or whatever. So this will tell you where the counts that Generate produced for each row versus what your file produced. And then you can go back and research those differences. And although it's not documented here on this slide, we have several other capabilities and tools and features built into Generate that help you find those differences to streamline that process. But ultimately, once you get to the point where Generate is producing a file that you certify and say, yep, this is exactly what we would submit from our current system, then we suggest you would load that up to EDPass, make sure it passes their validation checks, and then you're ready to move everything over into production and go from there. There's a link here for a lot of developer guide information as well. We'll talk about that a little bit more on another slide. This diagram just kind of shows everything I just talked about, just real quickly. But so if we're pulling data from the source system, so step one there, we're using the ETL to pull the data into the Generate staging area. Step two, we would run the staging validations and resolve any errors that it notified us of and rerun the ETL until we're satisfied with that. Then steps 3 and 4, we would move that data through Generate, just the migration process, we call it. And then in step 5 is where we would do that submission file comparison. We would compare what Generate's going to produce to what you have already or would normally produce. And then step 6, you would create the submission file. Finally, once all the testing's out of the way and we're good, that's the implementation phase. It's just a matter of moving everything into your production environment, making sure everything is documented, making sure that Generate has access, the production server has access to the data, all the stuff we've talked about before. And then finally, run that ETL and run everything in production when you're ready to create the submission file, upload it to EDPass, verify it passes those validation checks, and then submit it. And you should be all done at that point. Now, during this process, you can also do those same testing utilities that we used when we were developing this. You could run those in the production environment just to make sure that everything is still satisfactory. But theoretically, everything should be the same. If your test data, production data, all your servers and everything are configured correctly, it should be a smooth process here. I want to talk a little bit also about all of the documentation that's available for Generate users and Generate developers, ETL developers. This is accessible. There's a URL listed here, but also in the Generate application, there is a link under resources to the user guide. And if you click that, it takes you to a landing page. The middle diagram there, or the middle picture, says Introduction to Generate. And underneath there are different links for user guides, developer guides, release notes. And then from there, you could click on one of those and it would take you to another landing page. So again, it's a whole trove of information. It's really useful. And I know our team works really hard to keep this updated and formatted, and we're always trying to revise it so that it's even easier to access and even easier to understand the information that's in there. There's a lot, so we try hard to keep that updated. So that's the end of my presentation, and hopefully I kept you all from falling asleep. I'll pass you over to Charlie Silva now. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I'm sure they're all wide awake, or at least I hope they are. Yeah, my name is Charlie Silva, as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm the outlier at this as part of this presentation, and I say that because I am not a developer. I have not been a data manager or an EDFacts coordinator. I spent the last 7 + 8 years as the director of special education for the state of Idaho. And prior to that, had many years working in administration, whether at the local level or working in higher education. So I've kind of done a little bit in a lot of different areas. But in full disclosure, this is not my area of expertise. So we're going to look at this next scenario a little differently. We're going to talk about leadership teams, the need for leadership teams have incomplete information and growing gaps of understanding. Well, how come? What are those? What are the missing pieces that leadership teams need in order to support and promote the great work you're doing, whether that's promoting Generate, whether that's EDFacts, whether that's keeping people informed about changes with the SPP, APR, any and all of that. Now, again, like I said, I have not directly gotten into the weeds in those areas, but I have been part of the leadership teams that make decisions that have to go to superintendents, have to present to cabinets or to legislatures and whatnot. And I've had to directly supervise data managers. Early on at the department, the superintendent at the time, her big push was to break down all silos within the agency. It's like, whew, that's quite a goal. But we were charged with breaking down silos. And in my world, that silos, and they really weren't silos, but the areas that we worked closely were with our IT folks and our EDFacts coordinator, who had to then interface with the data manager for submitting different files, as you all are well aware of and the experts in. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. CIID has an amazing tool, the communication planner, that I will get to eventually. I want to first start with just, if you'll go to the next slide, just talking about communication, because it is truly all about communication. Christina mentioned in her presentation the importance of seeing a visual, and I would agree. And I think Jeff had some really great visuals that help us adult learners retain information. Well, I want to connect the communication strategies that I'm going to talk about with what I'm calling Goldilocks rules of communication. So finding that balance for effective communication to really move your work forward, because, and when I say move your work forward, about sustaining, taking Generate to the next level. What can we do to improve EDFacts reporting? The data manager, what does that person need to progress, right, to move it forward? So let's talk about the first rule. So Goldilocks rule of communication, and not too much information. And I want you, as I go through these, just take a minute to self-reflect. Don't have to share in chat or anything like that, but just ask yourself, is this how I communicate? Am I a too much kind of a person or not? But the person who communicates too much, the over-communication can be really overwhelming. And that then leads to confusion. I learned some hard lessons in my career, and the example that I'd like to share there is just, going to the legislature and having to present information and promote a statewide IEP system, and having to work with technology to promote that work. If you go too much, they shut down. So that goes to the bombarding with information really can lead to information shutdown. They just tune you out. Hopefully no one's doing that to me right now. And then the too much information may dilute the importance of the message. And so some examples, additional examples I would like to share is death by updates. That's my description, if you will, of those that, well, today I accomplished this when trying to upload files, or it's just too much. It's like too much information. What happens then is when it's too much information, the receiver, in this case me, will start to question, they sure seem to have a lot of time on their hands. Maybe there's an issues of priorities. So if we can go back to the next slide, somehow it flipped. Thank you. But the question of priorities, or if, and I'm not to pick on IT folks, because special ed is just as bad with data managers and all of our indicators, but sometimes we can riddle our messages with too much jargon. And that, again, is a sure way to shut down the communication. So that's the too much information. Now let's talk a little bit about the too little information. This too has consequences, right? And the consequences with too little information, it just leads to misunderstanding and potentially conflicts. And the conflict potentially could be, I would always tell my team, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So, if somebody doesn't have a document that explains, how Generate will benefit our agency, right? It's for naught. So that can lead to potential misunderstandings or conflict. It also can breed just that uncertainty and jeopardizes the trust that you always want to have. And it's just a really, inefficient way to work. Some examples of just too little information is sometimes the perception can be that you're wanting to be, as I describe it, as the keeper of the knowledge, right? I have all this knowledge. I have all this expertise, and I'm not going to share. So I like to say they missed kindergarten because they forgot or didn't learn how to share. And it's so important. If we want to sustain, if we want to move our work forward, then we have to build capacity. You have to have people that you cross-train. The data manager in my agency works so closely with the EDFacts coordinator. I truly believe they could have swapped jobs and been very successful. They built that capacity to share that knowledge. The other problem with just too little information, again, intentionally or unintentionally, you perpetuate, if you will, that the silos that we all know truly do exist in state agencies and other places as well. So that's the too little information. So now let's just talk about, well, what's right? Great, thank you. So we're not too hot, not too cold, we're just right. This strikes that balance, and this is easier said than done, but really ultimately that's what you're striving for, is that balance of trying to keep my the folks in my agency that truly are the decision makers. How much information do I give them so that they can make an informed decision, so they can support your day-to-day efforts, so they do understand what challenges you're facing, plus what the benefits are for continuing to use, Generate or changing files in EDFacts, whatever it may be. So that, again, provides that enough information to continue the work and the opportunities. So all of that, when you have it, quote, just right, this does allow you to move your work forward. This does allow you to, again, keep your bosses, superiors informed. So that was super quick, but I want to now take us to, well, how can we analyze and see, do we have too much too little, or just right? And how can we take that information and use the CIID tool, the communication planner, to capture all of that? This is a tool, and a tool is only as good, if you will, as the time and energy and information that is put into the tool. And is it reviewed? And here specifically, if you look at this communication tool, it asks those pertinent questions. How frequently do I need to be sharing information with the decision, I like to call decision makers? Who are my stakeholders, if you will? All of that is in this tool. So I was trying to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, to just get you to be thinking about the different components, and then how can you use this tool as your plan, if you will, to make sure you've captured all of the salient points. And really, I like to think of it as, from my experience, was very fortunate to work with very competent professionals that were truly committed to their work. And it's a way to showcase all of that great work, right? And as a leader, you want to not only recognize that, but you also want to remove barriers. But you can't remove barriers if you don't know what they are. So this tool is allows you to capture all of that information. And I guess I would say I would just strongly encourage you to, all the information is there if you haven't used it yet. Maybe you're one of the new folks that Christina was talking about with the staff turnover. But these tools are there and available, and I strongly encourage you to use them. So Dan, I think I might have gone a couple of minutes over. Apologize for that, but at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. That was just perfect, really demonstrating the utility of the communications planner, the importance of having a plan and sticking to that just right level of communication for preventing, breaking down, alleviating the stresses of those silos that down the road might result in some real challenges, or you might be facing those challenges. And this is a tool in your tool set to right the ship. I want to just, as we've come to the end of our scenarios, thank our CIID experts for identifying these common challenges, and those tools and locating those tools and giving a little bit of a demonstration about how to use them as a part of the solution to alleviate those challenges. These challenges are going to come up. We're working in complex systems. There are some challenges like having a new data manager. That's challenging no matter what, if your data are integrated or not. So within an integrated system, such a powerful system, you need powerful tools to resolve those issues. So thank you once again to our three presenters. You all have, state participants, SEA participants, invested through your use of the toolkit, your initial implementation, or your work with technical assistance providers. You've invested in these resources to get your project off the ground. And they're not just for getting the project off the ground. They can be revisited, they can be updated, they can be leveraged in new ways beyond the initial implementation. And I think that's a real strength. So while we have lots of expertise that we've heard from, we know that SEAs are boots on the ground, doing the work, overcoming these challenges. We're hearing about these experiences, and we're excited and supporting when we can or are asked to. At this point in the webinar, I'll be putting up an evaluation slide soon, but really wanted to just kind of get into the audience a little bit and hear about implementation challenges that you have faced in your work, and the tools and resources that you've used to overcome them. I've been chatting with my friend Angela in West Virginia, who has had successful implementation, and now Angela's, she's got a few changes in her state, and so she's taking on these challenges using CIID tools. Angela, I think I can't see the list exactly. I believe you're on. Would you mind coming off mute and sharing a little bit of what we've talked about?
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Riley, and I work with the West Virginia Department of Education. I am their EDFacts coordinator. I have also implemented Generate. I do have a multi-role type of thing going on here in West Virginia because I'm also a developer. I do cold fusion development amongst PHP development, amongst other things. I'm also a database programmer, so I write stored procedures, develop ETLs, and you name it, and I can do it. So I've been in IT for many, many years. But West Virginia has undergone many changes since we first implemented Generate. I have been through 4 superintendents, 3 executive directors, 2 managers, and 3 IDEA Part B managers. So the toolkit that we talked about today has really been useful to me for the staffing changes, especially at the high level. The scope document and the use case documents have been a beneficial way for me to communicate why Generate was important. Why did we need to dedicate these resources to the project? The project planner and things like that allowed me to show what all was entailed with implementing Generate and basically our federal reporting. And even its tie-ins into our data collections that we do 3 times a year. The moving on though to more of what my role pertains to, I've highly used the ETL checklist. And I mean, that's kind of been my Bible as we implemented Generate and as I support Generate. It's my mechanism to share my knowledge and knowledge of the system itself, the location of the data, and any transformation rules that we're doing from our live system to our data collections to our federal reporting and CIIDs. So even though we've been through a lot of staffing changes, we most recently implemented a new student information system. And it's called West Virginia Education Information System, or WEVIS, as I'll refer to it from here on out. So we have actually started, and we haven't completed all of them yet, going back through our ETL checklist. And what we're doing is we took the template and downloaded it because I wanted the newest versions, of course. So we downloaded the newest template, and it gave us a place for one source to the CIIDs document. So really what I wanted to do is take that documentation, take that template, and create my own out of that because I wanted one source document that said, here is the table and the data elements from the live system. Those go into our collection tables, our collection application, and here is the source of those, which then maps to the CIID element. So I don't have to go look up multiple documents or anything. I have a single source of information that I can go to whenever I'm bringing on a new person or whenever I have questions of how I'm doing something myself. And of course, during our first year of the implementation of the new system, we identified by using these ETL checklists, we've identified, data elements that needed to be added. We also changed some of the ways we're storing some data elements, such as the community eligibility provision. We're actually using the values from the EDFacts documentation for our school lunch program reporting now. So that actually helped me because having those ETL checklist gave me a way to say, here's the values that I have to transform into. Can we use any of these? And I actually have less transformation rules that I've had to document for the new system because of that. We have branding and we have a standardized coloring scheme and things like that. So we'll be adding those to our documentation also actually creating like a WVDE, here's how we do things. And I think that's, you know, having all of those procedures and transformation rules and everything document will really help the group as a whole. Um, Also, as we create these documents, we're not just doing it for IDEA, we're pulling in Title I. Course assessment has been involved. I'm pulling in my English learner program offices, my neglect and delinquent program offices. So it helps break down some of those silos that we spoke about before. And really, my goal is to have like more knowledge just available to everyone so that our federal reporting is no longer this black hole that only one person knows about. And I think the toolkit that CIID offers um, has really helped me and has been beneficial in doing that for our federal reporting group.
Angie, thank you for sharing. I think, it's pretty amazing, the work that's going on in West Virginia in this transformation. It sounds like the tools have been beneficial. We're really excited to hear that. And kudos to you and your team for managing the transition, leveraging resources to successfully submit your data in EDPass. I just want to, so again, once again, thank you. And thanks for being willing to share today. I think people really appreciate hearing from their peers in addition to CIID providers. As we approach the end of today's webinar, in the chat a few minutes ago, I was able to get the link for our webinar evaluation. Please use that link to complete this very short 3-4 minute survey. Our external evaluator provides us analysis of that data, and that we use to improve our service, make these webinar services relevant to your work. The link is right there in the chat. It's definitely something that we really value. So we appreciate you taking it. And on the screen, folks, if we have a couple of examples of CIID tools that people are using that have been mentioned today. Feel free to share any stories that you have, or questions as well for our presenters in the chat, or feel free to, I think maybe you might need to raise your hand to come off mute, but we'd love to hear in just the last minute if you have any questions that we might be able to answer. As we approach the top of the hour, I don't see anyone typing yet, so I am going to say thank you again for joining us. Hope your spring is going well, and the promise of spring is revealed to us all soon, that we're all having I think I saw dinner on the patio, or taking a walk and seeing new flowers bloom. From our whole team, thanks again for joining us today, and take care.